Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 5 of our series, our live streaming series. We are doing one chapter a day for 26 days straight, and today's chapter covers the War for Independence. And so this covers the years 1775 until 1784. And this chapter is divided into three sections, and each section has its own dedicated timeline. And these timelines are interactive. You can click through, and most of these are primary source documents, but also events to provide context to different things that are going on during this time period. And you can follow us on our website, www.tarpeia.us. Tarpeia is spelled Tarpeia.us. And so let's get into this chapter. So the first section is called Dissolving the Bands, which is a reference to the Declaration of Independence, where it says to dissolve the political bands which combine one people to another. And so that's what that name comes from. And we begin with King George III's proclamation of suppressing rebellion. This was issued by the king on August 23rd, 1775, and it is this proclamation which ended any and all peaceful reconciliation talks. So before this point, before August 23rd, 1775, both sides, Parliament and Congress, the Second Continental Congress, are still working towards reconciliation. Parliament will pass the Conciliatory Act, which is their attempt to negotiate peace before war begins, and then the Second Continental Congress will pass the Olive Branch Petition, which does not really make it in time for to the king in time for this proclamation. So reconciliation and peace talks end before the war could even begin, and this is the very document, the very proclamation, which made reconciliation, peaceful reconciliation, impossible. So you can blame the king for the war, and I have a video of me reading the proclamation. Only after the proclamation does the official Olive Branch petition arrive in London. A copy did make it to London before the proclamation, but then this is the actual proclamation, or the actual Olive Branch petition. Washington will send a letter to Canada to address the inhabitants of specifically Quebec, encouraging them to support the American cause, or at least remain neutral in the conflict with Great Britain. And so this will be part of the Quebec or Canada campaign by the Continental Army. Then you have Washington. He discovers the treachery of Dr. Benjamin Church. So there's going to be a lot of spies during the American Revolution on both sides. And Washington himself will create a spy network to help him get accurate information about British troop movements and stuff like that. Here's the Prohibitory Act passed by Parliament to cut all trade between Britain and the rebellious 13 colonies. So most of the acts before this point are restricting the colonies from trading with anyone else but Britain, and now Britain itself is cutting off all trade. So this is a full embargo on the United States, or the United Colonies. The King George III will issue a second proclamation regarding the American Revolution, and this time he is encouraging Parliament to take actions to send troops and military to the Americas in order to quell the rebellion. Lord Dunmore, he is the governor of Virginia, colonial Virginia at this time, the royal governor of Virginia, and he issues this proclamation promising freedom to enslaved people who fled their rebel masters and joined the British forces, sparking both hope among the enslaved and outrage among Patriot leaders. This proclamation intensified the siege around Dunmore's shrinking stronghold at Norfolk, galvanizing Virginia rebels to isolate him by land and sea while turning the colony's conflict into a war over both liberty and slavery. Now, this did not mean that any slave could leave their master and fight for the British. Only the slaves who had rebel masters could escape their rebel masters and fight for the British. So, no, this does not end slavery or encourage slaves to leave their masters. It's only for rebel masters. So if they're not a rebel master, if it's a loyalist master, the slave wasn't allowed to leave. So some misrepresentation of Lord Dunmore's proclamations and common literature. But it does anger the rebels, the patriots. So that is true. That part of this proclamation is true. Congress would pass a resolution of secrecy, and it's just a fun little document that I added to this timeline. You also have the establishment of the Marine Corps, which I thought was interesting to include. Battle of Great Bridge, regular and loyalist troops, including former slaves, are ordered by Lord Dunmore to attack a fortified Patriot position near Great Bridge, 9 miles from Norfolk, Virginia. An eyewitness informs a friend that the king's troops gave way after sustaining considerable loss and behaving like true-born Englishmen. Here's Washington's letter to Colonel Reed. In this letter, he calls Lord Dunmore of Virginia, the governor of Virginia, the arch traitor of the rights of humanity. He does mention the slave proclamation by Lord Dunmore, but of course, Lord Dunmore is also attacking fellow Virginians who are rebels. And so it's not just about slavery, it's also about attacking your fellow Virginians. Then you have Knox's letter to Washington on moving cannons from Ticonderoga to Boston. So in the last chapter, Fort Ticonderoga is taken by Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold, and the cannons from that fort are transported by Henry Knox all the way down. It's 300 miles in the winter, all the way down to where Washington was, which is in Boston. You have the Battle of Quebec, where American forces under Generals Richard Montgomery and Benedict Arnold launched a desperate winter assault on British-held Quebec, hoping to bring Canada into the Revolution. The attack failed. Montgomery was killed, which this is what the famous painting depicts, and Benedict Arnold was wounded, and the battered American army forced into retreat, securing Canada for Britain and ending the first American invasion of the North. At this time, the state, or the colonies, not yet states, are going to be creating their own constitutions. And so this is the very first constitution made by a colony, which is New Hampshire's Constitution of 1776, and it's being passed before independence is declared. So we're now on our way to independence. In January of 1776, Common Sense is published by Thomas Paine, and it was written to persuade ordinary colonists that reconciliation with Britain was neither possible, thanks to the king, nor desirable, and that full independence was both logical and necessary. The pamphlet attacked monarchy as corrupt, sinful, and unnatural, condemned George III directly, and argued in plain language for republican government, continental union, and America's destiny separated from Britain. It electrified public opinion, selling tens of thousands of copies in just a few months, winning support from figures like John Adams, with reservations about some of its more radical ideas. and helping shift the revolutionary movement toward independence, while loyalists, moderates, and elites, such as John Dickinson, rejected it as reckless, socially destabilizing, and dangerously democratic. So not all of the Founding Fathers, in fact, many of the Founding Fathers did not like common sense. Henry Knox arrives in Boston with the cannons from Ticonderoga, and Washington will use these cannons to bombard Boston from Dorchester Heights. And it is in March 1776 when Adam Smith will publish this very famous book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. This is pretty much an inquiry, but also an argument against certain policies, especially mercantilist policies and regulation by Britain. And so Adam Smith is very much in favor of America and believes that a lack of regulations is what's best, not just for America, but also Britain, in order to allow for investment and productive growth. The British troops evacuate Boston because Washington is bombarding the city. There's a letter from Adams to Gates. John Adams wrote to General Horatio Gates, celebrating the British evacuation of Boston as a turning point in the struggle for American liberty. There's going to be lots of turning points. Adams urged Gates to stay vigilant, framing the victory not as an end, but as the beginning of a wider war for independence. South Carolina will create its own constitution in March of 1776. You have the Halifax Resolves on April 12, 1776, and this is the first time that a community authorized North Carolina's delegates to the Continental Congress, a colony, gave permission for its delegates to the Continental Congress to vote for independence, marking the first official colonial endorsement of separation. Thoughts on Government by John Adams. This is a very, very interesting essay. It's one of my favorite essays, where John Adams is writing on what he thinks the best form of government is, and he's going to advocate for a tri-part government, a legislature, executive, and judiciary, and have a bicameral legislature, and have separation of powers, and a system of checks and balances. And he gives a more philosophical argument for why we should have these things, why you need a separation of powers, and the mechanism of that, and how that will secure liberty and representation of the people. Rhode Island will renounce its allegiance to Great Britain on May 4th, 1776. Virginia will have its own convention, where it grants its delegates to the Second Continental Congress permission to vote for independence. Now you have Lee's resolution. This resolution is that these United Colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiances to the former crown, to the British crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is dissolved. So that's the first part of the resolution. The second part is to create a new form of government, and that's the third part. The second part is to have a committee made in order to start negotiating foreign alliances. As per the Lee's resolution on June 11, 1776, the Committee of Five is appointed, although this painting only has 3 men. There's actually 5 men: John Adams from Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin from Pennsylvania, Thomas Jefferson from Virginia, Roger Sherman from Connecticut, and Robert Livingston from New York, tasked with writing the Declaration of Independence. During this time, on June 12th, so the next day, 1776, Virginia will pass its Declaration of Rights, which is a very, very important document. It's written by George Mason, a mentor to Thomas Jefferson. Now we have New Jersey on June 15th votes to dissolve the royal government and establish a new government. Pennsylvania will hold its own convention for independence. The Committee of Five submit draft of the Declaration of Independence to the Second Continental Congress. That's what this very famous and one of my favorite paintings depicts. This is not the signing of the Declaration of Independence. This is the Committee of Five, which are these 5 men in the middle, presenting their draft of the Declaration of Independence to the Second Continental Congress. So that's what this image, this painting, is depicting. Maryland will grant its delegates permission to vote for independence on June 28th, 1776. Virginia will create its own constitution. And then the Second Continental Congress will vote for independence. First on July 1st, 9 colonies vote for it, 2 against it, Pennsylvania and South Carolina, and 1 abstention, New York, and 1 was deadlocked, Delaware. On July 2nd, New Jersey will pass its own state constitution. And also on July 2nd, 1776, the Second Continental Congress will vote for independence. 12 of the 13 colonies vote for the resolution, with New York abstaining. Congress declares the resolution to be in effect. So it is unanimous, because an abstention means that your vote does not count. So it's 12 out of 12. While whatever the 12 states decide, the 13th state will go with it. So it is technically unanimous, but New York didn't vote for independence because they were waiting for their state legislature to give the delegates of the Second Continental Congress the authority to declare independence, which will be done later, ironically. And then on July 3rd and July 4th, you have a debate in the Second Continental Congress over the text of the Declaration of Independence. And so this is after they voted for independence. Now they have to decide what should the text of the Declaration be. And on July 4th, 1776, this the text of the Declaration will be approved. So this is what we celebrate. We don't celebrate the actual independence, which happened on July 2nd. We celebrate the Declaration of Independence, which is July 4th. And then on July 8th, so 4 days later, Colonel John Nixon, no relation to Richard Nixon, reads the Declaration of Independence for the first time to the public. And he reads this just outside of Independence Hall. New York grants its delegates permission to vote for independence on July 9th. So New York was going to be about a week late in declaring independence. And then on August 2nd, 1776, the Declaration of Independence is signed by most of the members of those who voted for independence. So 50 of the 56 signers signed it on August 2nd. And that is the last event on this section. So it goes from King George III making a proclamation of suppression, and it ends with the Declaration of Independence. So you see what I did there with the names, the Proclamation of Suppression and the Declaration of Independence. Now we go to the second section of this chapter, which covers the bulk of the actual war for independence. And as you can see, this covers a lot of, pretty much all of the battles and a lot of the political developments throughout the war. So this is much longer and much more detailed than this section up here. And so we begin with Concord Town Resolutions on the Massachusetts Constitution. You have a lot of local activity when it comes to not just declaring independence before the federal government under the Second Continental Congress declares independence, but you also have a lot of local action and political participation when it comes to creating the new state constitutions. And so we're just adding a bunch of these primary source documents to provide the sources of what is going on during this period. General Howe, that is the brother of Admiral Howe, lands on Long Island, and this will begin the New York campaign. So he lands with 4,000 British soldiers, crossed the Hudson from Staten Island, and landed in Gravesend Bay, Long Island, in preparation for their advance to Washington's forces in Brooklyn. Then you have the Battle of Brooklyn Heights on August 27th, 1776. Let me just zoom in here so it's easier to see on the timeline. And then Washington will retreat from Brooklyn. Let's see if that looks good. Yeah. Washington will retreat from Brooklyn on August 30th, 1776, after heavy losses, although Washington will execute a daring nighttime retreat across the East River from Long Island, from Brooklyn, to Manhattan Island. Delaware will create its own state constitution while the New York campaign is going on. And then you have the Staten Island Peace Conference, where General William Howe and his brother Richard Admiral Howe, that's a typo on my part. It's supposed to be Admiral Richard Howe, not Richard Admiral Howe. So I'll have to fix that later. Met with Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Edward Rutledge. So founding fathers, and that's what this engraving depicts. General Howe and his brother were members of a peace commission which held the power to issue pardons to rebels, but this was not enough to reconcile with the Patriots, who demanded recognition for independence. Delaware will pass its own Declaration of Rights, similar to the Virginia Declaration of Rights. Washington will evacuate New York City in southern Manhattan, and he will go to Harlem in northern Manhattan. Let's see, General Howe will take New York City. That's in southern Manhattan. Let's see, General Howe lands in Manhattan at Kips Bay, which is around where, I think that's where the Brooklyn Bridge connects Manhattan to Brooklyn, around Kips Bay, which was lightly defended by American forces during the retreat. Later that day, Howe enters New York City as Loyalists cheer. So New York was a very Loyalist city, and that's one of the reasons why Washington left New York instead of trying to defend it. Then you had the Battle of Harlem Heights on September 16th, 1776. American forces under General George Washington achieved a morale-boosting victory against the British at the Battle of Harlem Heights in New York. The engagement, though small, demonstrated the Continental Army's growing discipline and resilience after earlier defeats in the campaign. New York City will have to deal with a fire that destroys a quarter of the city. Now, I haven't seen any primary sources saying what was the cause of the fire. It might have been accidental. It might have been on purpose. sabotage and arson, but we don't know. At least I don't know from any actual primary sources if they found a reason why the fire started. And it's at this time that Nathan Hale is executed. He was an American spy, and he spied on the British in New York and he would be executed for being a spy for gathering intelligence in support of the Continental Army. Hale's famous declaration, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country," made him a symbol of patriotic sacrifice for the revolutionary cause. Then you have the Constitution of Pennsylvania, which is established on September 28th, 1776. General Howe lands in the Bronx. And so Howe is now trying to surround Washington in Harlem and the Bronx. So he's trying to go around and flank the American forces and try to trap the George Washington's army in Manhattan. You have the Battle of White Plains, October 28th, 1776, where British and Hessian forces under William Howe engaged the Continental Army commanded by George Washington at the Battle of White Plains. Near White Plains, that's in the Bronx. After fierce fighting, particularly around Chatterton's Hill, Washington withdrew his forces northward to avoid encirclement and preserve the Continental Army. Although the British secured the battlefield, the American retreat prevented the destruction of the army and allowed the revolutionary cause to continue following a difficult campaign. You have Maryland's Constitution of 1776. You have the Battle of Fort Washington. This is in Harlem, and it's fought by British and Hessian forces, and it is a British victory. You also have one of the first instances of a woman actually participating in the fighting herself. This is not the same as the more famous event where that happens, but it was notable for the time. And then you have the Battle of Fort Lee. This is in the Bronx. So across the water, across the East River from Harlem. And so this followed the fall of Fort Washington, where Continental forces abandoned Fort Lee in New Jersey. Oh, I'm sorry, this was on the other side. This is across the water in New Jersey. To avoid encirclement by the advancing British army, the retreat marked another setback for General Washington, forcing the Continental Army into a difficult winter campaign across New Jersey. Then you have Howe's proclamation. General Howe and his brother, Admiral Howe, issued a proclamation to the colonists, encouraging them to surrender by offering a pardon. General Charles Lee is captured by British dragoons. The British dragoons captured General Charles Lee in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, removing one of the Continental Army's most senior officers from the fight. His capture left the American forces temporarily leaderless in this sector and added to the series of setbacks during Washington's New Jersey campaign. And then you have the Constitution of North Carolina. Now you have a very important and famous primary source. This is Thomas Paine's The American Crisis. And number one, there's a bunch of these. And so this one opens up with the famous words, "These are the times that try men's souls." And, that's just an amazing line in itself, but the rest of the paper is pretty impressive. And then here's a video of me reading the entire American Crisis, number one. And Washington will cross the Delaware on December 25th, 1776. and fight at the Battle of Trenton, defeating the Hessian forces there. And then Washington encourages reenlistments. In December of 1776, the Second Battle of Trenton, where Howe retakes Trenton, but could not defeat Washington's forces. During the night after the battle, Washington moves his forces from Trenton to Princeton, and then Washington wins at the Battle of Princeton. So there's two battles of Trenton, and then the Battle of Princeton. And Washington wins two of those. Now, Washington establishes winter quarters at Morristown, New Jersey, in order to keep an eye on Howe. Thomas Paine will write The American Crisis #2, talking about the victories at Trenton and Princeton. Congress will authorize the printing of the Declaration of the names of the signers, and so the Second Continental Congress will publish this. This is the Mary Catherine Goddard printed version of the Declaration of Independence with the signatories at the bottom. So this is the first time that the names are actually seen with the text. And then George Washington will make a proclamation about the people who are swearing allegiance to Great Britain, mostly being forced to by General Howe. And so Washington is saying, hey, I know you guys were forced to swear allegiance to Great Britain, but I'm giving you this opportunity to switch sides now. And so this will help bolster the patriotic side by convincing many colonists who were forced to be loyal to the British to switch sides. You have the Georgia Constitution of 1777, American Crisis #3, talking about continuing the fight. New York's Constitution of 1777, Burgoyne arrives at Quebec. So General Burgoyne, he's a British general. He is a subordinate to General Howe, and he arrived with General Howe and also General Clinton, and he will become important later in New York. And then they will, General Howe will send Burgoyne all the way around to Canada, to Quebec, for Burgoyne to raise a force, and then march south back to New York. And this will be a devastating decision for the British. This is what loses the British, this decision right here, to split the British force and to have them separated from each other and far away from each other. And General Howe, he could have marched north while Burgoyne marched south and took on Washington's forces from two fronts, and they would have been able to support each other. But instead of doing that, which would have been the smart strategic thing to do, Burgoyne would be left alone, and Howe will sail out of New York and go all the way around the Chesapeake into Maryland at Baltimore and attack Philadelphia. So that is not a very smart decision by General Howe, and we'll see why leaving Burgoyne by himself in New York. He's marching down from Quebec through New York, and you see why that is a terrible decision. So Burgoyne, he departs St. John's, south along Lake Champlain, from Canada to modern-day United States. Howe crosses into New Jersey. After concentrating his troops in New York City, General Howe marches roughly 18,000 soldiers into New Jersey to force a battle with Washington. And the British will occupy Crown Point. Howe will reach the Somerset Courthouse in Millstone, New Jersey, attempting to force Washington into battle. Washington refuses to fight Howe, and Howe is forced to abandon the campaign and return to New York City. Burgoyne will take Fort Ticonderoga, and Washington will, because Howe retreats from New Jersey back to New York, Washington retakes New Jersey. And the Constitution of Vermont. So Vermont is actually the 14th colony. We have the original 13 colonies, but Vermont will be doing its own thing separate from the other 13 colonies, while also fighting the British. And so this is the terrible decision of General Howe. He embarks from New York City, not to aid Burgoyne, who is in upper state New York, near Fort Ticonderoga. Instead of combining their force with Burgoyne, Howe will even go further away from Burgoyne, leave him far away from any reinforcements, and sail to Baltimore in Maryland in order to attack Philadelphia. And so, of course, at this time, the Americans don't know that. And so Burgoyne, he continues to move south. He started at Quebec in Canada. He went to Fort Ticonderoga in northern New York. And now he's going to Fort Edwards, New York. Now, the British will be holed up at around Fort Stanwix. The British forces under St. Ledger abandoned their siege of Fort Stanwix due to Benedict Arnold's bringing reinforcements to lift the siege. This weakens Burgoyne's west. And then you have the Battle of Oriskany, where Tryon County militia under Brigadier General Nicholas Herkimer attempted to relieve Fort Stanwix and were ambushed in a ravine by British Allied forces of loyalists and native warriors supporting Barry St. Ledger. The fighting was among the bloodiest of the war, with approximately 450 American casualties killed, wounded, or captured, and about 150 to 200 British and native casualties, crippling the relief column, but failing to save the British campaign in the Mohawk Valley. You have the Battle of Bennington. Burgoyne sent Baum to take Bennington, Vermont, and secure supplies. Baum's forces were defeated by American militia with 1,000 British and Hessian losses, along with many supplies and native allies defect. So Burgoyne in northern New York, he's having a terrible time. He's losing on all fronts of his campaign. And again, Howe is nowhere near Burgoyne. He's actually further than he was by disembarking from New York and going all the way around to the Chesapeake. So it would have been smart if Howe marched north while Burgoyne marched south, and they would have met up, supported each other, secured supplies, and then marched to New Jersey with a massive army, fully supplied, and with the north secured to attack Washington. But they don't do that. They divide up their own forces, and then they continue to divide up their own forces individually, especially Burgoyne, and each of those small detachments gets defeated, and that weakens the overall campaign. So you should never divide up your forces like that. You should always keep your forces close enough to each other where they can support one another in an engagement with the enemy. You want to divide the enemy up, but you don't want to divide yourself up, especially divide yourself up in a way where you can't support each other. And so Gates will establish defenses at Bemis Heights. This is General Horatio Gates, and this is in the Hudson Corridor. And for the next few weeks, reinforcements arrive from the north, and Benedict Arnold creates further defenses. So Gates and Benedict Arnold are the main American generals fighting Burgoyne in the north. Howe disembarks at head of Elk, Maryland, after a long voyage south and into the Chesapeake. General Howe disembarks his forces in Maryland in preparation to attack Philadelphia, the seat of the Continental Congress. And so Washington, he now knows where Howe is, and he knows what the target is. And so Washington marches from New Jersey all the way to Pennsylvania and to Philadelphia to set up fortifications and defenses in places like Brandywine, which is just south of Philadelphia. And so here is the Battle of Brandywine, which happened on September 11th, 1777. British forces under General William Howe defeated General George Washington's Continental Army at Brandywine in Pennsylvania. The loss allowed the British to capture Philadelphia, the revolutionary capital, but the Continental Army remained intact. So the British, they might be winning all these battles, but they're not actually winning any actual objectives. Their objectives are taking land, but it's not about taking land, it's about defeating your enemy. And so if you take the land, but your enemy's still out there, then you actually didn't win anything. And so the mindset of the British of taking land as opposed to defeating the enemy will confuse the British campaign and like all the objectives that they have, which again, it's not about taking land. Land doesn't matter. It's about the people who are your enemies. Thomas Paine will write American Crisis number 4, talking about the most recent events like the Battle of Brandywine. Burgoyne will cross the Hudson, severing his line of retreat to Canada and supply lines in preparation of the Saratoga campaign. First Battle of Saratoga, which is the Battle of Freeman's Farm, near Stillwater, New York. British forces under Major General John Burgoyne clashed with American troops commanded by Major General Horatio Gates, with Benedict Arnold directing aggressive counterattacks that repeatedly checked the British advance. Although tactically inconclusive, the battle inflicted heavy British casualties, about 600 killed, wounded, or captured, versus roughly 300 American casualties, stalling Burgoyne's army and setting the conditions for its eventual defeat at Saratoga. The British are able to seize Philadelphia on September 26, 1777, after the Battle of Brandywine. Here's the Battle of Germantown. Washington led the Continental Army in an ambitious attack on British forces at Germantown, Pennsylvania. Despite initial successes, confusion and heavy fog contributed to an American defeat, though the assault demonstrated the growing skill and determination of the Revolutionary forces. Then you have the second battle of Saratoga, the Battle of Bemis Heights, also near Stillwater, New York. British forces under Major General John Burgoyne launched a reconnaissance in force and were decisively counterattacked by American troops commanded by Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold, leading a ferocious assault that shattered the British line and mortally wounded Brigadier General Simon Fraser. The Americans inflicted roughly 600 British casualties, while only suffering about 150. This forced Burgoyne to retreat north, and making his surrender 10 days later inevitable. And so Burgoyne is encircled. Following the Battle of Bemis Heights, Burgoyne is at Saratoga, where he's surrounded, and then about a week later, on October 17th, 1777, Burgoyne surrenders at Saratoga. And this battle is like the most important battle of the war, because this battle convinced the English victory in this battle is what convinced the French to get involved and support the Americans. Excuse me. We have the British capture of Fort Mifflin, and so this is in the Delaware, on the Delaware River around Philadelphia. The Continental Congress adopts the Articles of Confederation. This is the first formal constitution for the United States, and it created the framework for a national government. The Articles emphasized state sovereignty while granting limited powers to Congress, reflecting the colony's wariness of central authority, although this will not be ratified for many years because it needs to be ratified by all states. It needs to be unanimous, and with this, it was drafted by John Dickinson, and one of the reasons why John Dickinson was not in favor of immediate independence, he wanted to postpone it at least a little bit before or until after he was able to create this Articles of Confederation. And one of the major flaws of the Articles of Confederation was the fact that the federal government could not raise taxes, and so it depended on states to give the national government money, which some states, like Rhode Island, didn't give any money, despite Rhode Island benefiting from the war effort. So, yeah, this is one of the major flaws of the Articles of Confederation, which will become a problem later. Here's the skirmish of White Marsh, November 16, 1777. Howe probes Washington's defensive position north of Philadelphia, but doesn't commit to a full offensive, and he returns to Philadelphia. While Howe is going to encamp at Philadelphia, Washington is going to encamp at Valley Forge. Here's the Treaty of Alliance with France. So after the Battle of Saratoga, the French join the war, and they pass these two documents, two treaties, Treaty of Alliance, and then Treaty of Amity and Commerce. So one is a military alliance, the other is a trade agreement. Here's South Carolina's state constitution of 1778. Thomas Paine will write The American Crisis No. 5 in March of 1778 and talks about the victory at Saratoga and the French entering the war. Baron von Steuben arrives at Valley Forge. He is a Prussian officer, and he will join Washington's staff, and he will standardize drills, tactical reforms, and officer conduct, which will turn Washington's ragtag Continental Army into a more professional fighting force. And so Baron von Steuben is a very important person in the historical tradition of the army. And so he'll create things like the Blue Book, which is still used by the army today, although it's been rewritten. And then General Clinton arrives to take command. General Howe resigns his post as British commander in North America following the defeat of Saratoga, and he stays in Philadelphia until after the preparation. Until after the preparation of the evacuation of Philly. General Clinton arrives to replace Howe, and he brings with him a new strategy for the war now that France has joined. And his strategy will be to sit still and just let someone else fight. So, not really a good strategy. And so from June 5th to June 18th, the British will evacuate Philadelphia and march through New Jersey on their way back to New York. And so the whole campaign was just a waste of time and resources and didn't achieve anything for the British to sail around the Chesapeake into Maryland and then fight at Brandywine, take Philadelphia. It didn't achieve anything for the British except divide their forces and let Burgoyne be alone without any reinforcements and lose, and then get the French to join the war. So, not the best strategy. Now, it's when the British are on the march from Philly to New York that Washington will march out of Valley Forge, and he will intercept the British forces marching from Philly to New York at the Battle of Monmouth. And so this is a very important battle. And here's a cool painting painted by Emanuel Lutz. In this battle, Washington engaged British forces at the Battle of Monmouth in New Jersey, resulting in one of the largest battles of the Revolutionary War. Although tactically inconclusive, the battle demonstrated the improved discipline and resilience of the American army following the Valley Forge encampment. So the French army is getting weaker, while the American army is getting stronger and more professionally trained. You have the Wyoming Valley Massacre in Wyoming Valley in northeastern Pennsylvania. British commander Major Butler and Iroquois warriors consisting of about 800 men engaged an American force under Colonel Butler, no relation to each other, of about 400 men. After the battle, the Americans fled, only to be cut down with 300 of them dying. Even when there's another typo, even when some were surrendering. The French fleet arrives. This is just the fleet, not the army, by Admiral Charles Hector. Comte d'Estaing arrives with a French fleet as the first French intervention of the war, although he does not arrive with soldiers for any land battles. Clinton's army will reach New York City on July 12, 1778. This is the same army that was fleeing from Philadelphia across New Jersey, where they got attacked by Washington at Monmouth. And this will begin General Clinton's new strategy for the war, which is just to stay in New York City and not fight Washington, and send someone else down to the south in order to start a new front, which is the Southern Front. So this is the end of the Northern Campaign, which is July 12, 1778, and now you'll begin the Southern Campaign. Let's see at this time. Oops. So all this red is what we just talked about, which is the Northern Campaign. Now the blue is going to begin the stalemate and the Southern Campaign. So we begin with the Franco-American Rhode Island Campaign. American and French forces attempt to retake Newport, Rhode Island. However, a storm scattered the French fleet, and the American forces were unable to take Rhode Island. The Treaty of Fort Pitt, which established the first formal agreements between the United States and the Lenape, the Delaware Nation. The treaty promised peace, trade, and mutual support, while also allowing the U.S. to build a fort in Lenape territory, marking an early attempt at diplomatic relations with Native Americans during the Revolutionary War. So some of the used to have been allies of the British are now switching sides to the Americans. Thomas Paine will write American Crisis Number 6, where he defended the American alliance with France and criticized British peace overtures as insincere, and argued that independence could be secured only through continued military resistance. At the Cherry Valley Massacre, British allied Iroquois warriors and loyalist forces attacked the settlement of Cherry Valley in New York, killing more than 30 settlers and soldiers. And so a number of these massacres will galvanize the Americans, and the Americans will do some massacres back against the Native Americans. You have the American Crisis Number 7 by Thomas Paine. You have the British expedition into Georgia, so now the Southern Campaign is opening up, and that begins towards the end of 1778. The British will capture Savannah. Franklin is introduced to Stansbury. Franklin introduced Stansbury to Andre. So this is William Franklin, son of Benjamin Franklin, who is a loyalist and a governor of New Jersey, and he introduced Joseph Stansbury, a merchant acquainted with Benedict Arnold, to John Andre, the British spy chief. This begins the treachery of Arnold, since John Andre, who is now acquainted with Joseph Stansbury, will get into contact with Benedict Arnold. And you have the Sullivan-Clinton expedition, over 40 Iroquois towns destroyed by American forces, given direct order from General Washington to weaken native fighting power. So before this point, several massacres were being committed by Native Americans on colonists on behalf of the British, and so the Sullivan-Clinton expedition is made to go around destroying native villages and to weaken native fighting power in order to stop the massacres of colonists. Thomas Jefferson will draft a bill for establishing religious freedom, and this will be published years later, and it will have a major impact on the Bill of Rights. It is during this time, June 21st, 1779, that Spain will declare war on Britain, entering the conflict as an ally of France, but not formally of the United States. Spanish military actions, including the siege of British forts along the Mississippi and Gulf Coast, diverted British resources and bolstered the broader effort against Britain in the Revolutionary War, especially in the Southern Campaign. Washington establishes headquarters at West Point. This is very important for the development of Washington keeping General Clinton trapped in New York, which General Clinton is not going to leave New York for the remainder of the war, and this is where the treachery of Benedict Arnold will happen. And then you have the Battle of Savannah. American and French forces attempted to recapture Savannah, Georgia, from the British, and were repelled. Washington establishes headquarters at Fort Manson in Morristown. Washington established his headquarters at the Ford Manson, I said that wrong. It's Ford Mansion in Morristown, New Jersey, while the army encamped in the nearby woods, Jockey Hollow. This served as his base during the harsh winter of 79 to 80 and is one of the best documented Revolutionary War headquarters. The American Crisis, number 8, is published by Thomas Paine, and he talks about the hardships of towards the end of the war, and he encouraged the Americans to persist. And interesting, during this time, Pennsylvania will pass an act to abolish slavery. So that's interesting. A lot of people nowadays, for some reason, believe that the war was fought to preserve slavery, when in fact many states, especially in the North, were actively trying to abolish slavery, not just the slave trade, but the act of slavery itself in the North, while the war is going on. So I think people who believe that the war was fought to preserve slavery need to do a little bit more reading of the primary sources. Clinton will sail to South Carolina. So Clinton, with 8,000 men, depart New York City and sail south in preparation to capture South Carolina. Here's a siege of British capture of Charleston. And then here's the Battle of St. Louis, or Louis, against the Spanish. The Waxhaws Massacre occurred in northern South Carolina, where British cavalry overtook and destroyed a retreating Continental force under Colonel Abraham Buford, following the fall of Charleston. Out of roughly 350 American troops, about 113 were killed. 150 wounded, and the rest were captured, with many Americans cut down after attempting to surrender, giving rise to the Patriot rallying cry, Tarleton's Quarter, and fueling fierce backcountry resistance in the Southern Campaign. So part of the reason why the British open up the Southern Campaign is because they believe that there are more loyalists in the South. But when the British are committing massacres against the colonists, this will harden the hearts of the Southerners against the British and will only galvanize the Southerners to fight the British harder. So, again, terrible British strategy. Thomas Paine will write American Crisis number 9, and this is written during the harsh and the military setbacks and economic strain of the war, especially with the opening of the Southern Campaign and the loss of some of the capitals of southern states. Massachusetts will create its constitution, written by John Adams, and have it passed on June 15th, 1780. The first French reinforcements arrive. This is the first army reinforcements, and they only arrive at the war at pretty much the end of the war. This is now July 10th, 1780. The war is only going to last another year. So, French, they were important, but at the same time, they didn't fight that many battles. Benedict Arnold, at least for the Americans in North America, Benedict Arnold is appointed commander at West Point in August of 1780. The infamous Battle of Camden. British forces under General Charles Cornwallis decisively defeated the Continental Army at the Battle of Camden, South Carolina. General Horatio Gates was the commander of the battle, and 1,000 Americans were killed or wounded, with another 1,000 captured, with only 300 British losses. The rout shattered American resistance in the region, leading to heavy losses and a crisis of morale in the Southern Campaign. Despite heavy American losses and a victory for Britain, the British only controlled the coastal cities, while the countryside became a theater of guerrilla resistance. Patriot leaders such as Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, Thomas Sumter, and Andrew Pickens waged hit-and-run attacks and small-scale engagements. Here's a letter from Alexander Hamilton to William Duane, in order expressing his opinion, Hamilton's opinion, about the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. And this is before the Articles of Confederation are even ratified. John Andre is captured, the British Major General, who is the spy master, and carrying secret plans for Benedict Arnold's about West Point for the British to capture West Point. Although he's caught, and then Benedict Arnold flees West Point and goes to the British side. John Andre will be executed. And now we have The Extraordinary Crisis, written by Thomas Paine. This is another essay talking about the treason of Benedict Arnold. Here is a letter to the inhabitants of America. This is Benedict Arnold trying to justify his treason and denouncing the American Revolution. And that this will begin the end of the actual revolution, the fighting in 1781, with the last module of this section, The World Turned Upside Down. So now Benedict Arnold, he is a British officer, and he will lead raids on places like Richmond. He will retreat from Richmond January 19th, 1781. So the Americans really hate Benedict Arnold at this point. The Articles of Confederation are ratified on March 1st, 1781, and on the same day they elect the first president of the Congress, which is Samuel Huntington. The Spanish will siege and capture Pensacola, Florida, from the British. And then you have the Battle of Petersburg. This is Petersburg, Virginia, in a series of skirmishes aimed at disrupting British supply lines. Though inconclusive, the actions weakened British control in the region and demonstrated growing coordination between Continental and French forces. Then you have the Washington and Rochambeau plan a march from the north all the way down to the south. You have the Siege of Augusta. American and French forces laid siege to British-held town of Augusta, Georgia, aiming to reclaim it from Loyalist control. The successful siege forced the British to surrender, strengthening the Patriot influence in the southern theater of the Revolutionary War. Then you have this massive 680-mile march of the Washington Rochambeau March all the way down to Yorktown, where the final major battle of the war will take place. And so while that march is going on, you have some other smaller battles like the Battle of Green Spring. Cornwallis repels Lafayette in a small engagement, but avoids a major disaster. Lafayette keeps Cornwallis contained in southeastern Virginia while awaiting for reinforcements from Washington and Rochambeau. Thomas McKean becomes the second president of Congress. And then Hamilton will start writing and publishing his Continentalist essay. So this is Continentalist number 1, published on July 12, 1781. And this is addressing the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. And he'll write a bunch of these because he has a lot to say about the Articles of Confederation. You have the Battle of Louisburg on July 21st, 1781, where American and French forces captured the British fortress of Louisburg, a key stronghold in Cape Breton Island, and the victory secured a strategic port for the Allies, disrupting British naval operations and supply lines in the North Atlantic. Brom and Bet v. Ashley. This is a case that's going on in Massachusetts. It's a case about slavery, and the Massachusetts courts rule in favor of slaves, freeing them, because the Declaration says that all men are born equal and free. All men are created equal, and which they claimed that the not just the Declaration of Independence, but also the state's constitution that said that all men are born equal, free and equal, means that slavery is unlawful, and the court will side with the slaves and free them. So again, the idea that the American Revolution was fought to preserve slavery is just simply not true. And you have Continentalist number 3 by Hamilton. Admiral Graves attempts to intercept Admiral Grossi. So Graves is the British admiral, but he fails to capture and defeat Grossi's navy. Continentalist number 4. You have the Battle of the Chesapeake, a pivotal naval engagement which opened up the Chesapeake for the French after defeating the British. And this allowed for the French and British, or the French and the Americans with Washington and Rochambeau to meet at Yorktown and surround Cornwallis in the city. And so the siege of Yorktown begins in late September, and will last until late October, where on October 19th, 1781, Cornwallis will surrender Yorktown, and this is the final major battle of the war. And news of this will reach England, and the English will start to negotiate peace. John Hanson will become the 3rd president of Congress, and he will oversee the last stages of the war before peace talks. The troops will evacuate Wilmington, North Carolina. So after the Battle of Yorktown, the British are now leaving the South. Lord North hears about the surrender at Yorktown on November 25th, 1781. That's when news arrived. And he will resign because of this. You have the first motion to end the war. So this is a motion in Parliament to end the war. So this is a motion in Parliament to end the war. And at the same time, you have the naval battle of Usaint, French and British ships battle off the west coast of Brittany for the second time during this war. Congress opens the Bank of North America. This is the first national bank, and it will help establish financial credit and stabilize the wartime economy. You have the second motion in Parliament to end the war. And then with the third motion, Parliament finally approves to end the war with America. The King will reply to Parliament, and he will talk about his regrets for wanting to end the war. And he says, having no other objective at heart other than the tranquility, felicity, and prosperity for my people, you can be assured that as a result of your advice, I will take those measures which will seem to contribute the most to the reestablishment of harmony between Great Britain and the revolted colonies, which is so essential to the prosperity of both, and that my efforts will be directed in the most efficacious manner against our European enemies until such a peace can be obtained and will be in agreement with the interests and permanent well-being of my realm. And Thomas Paine will write the American Crisis number 10, talking about how well the war is going at this point, especially after the Battle of Yorktown. You have yet another massacre, this time of Native Americans by Pennsylvania militia. And then you have Adams's letter to Livingston on Parliament's resolution. John Adams wrote a letter to Robert R. Livingston discussing recent British parliamentary resolutions relating to the end of the war and opening peace negotiations during the final phase of the American Revolutionary War. In the letter, Adams addressed Britain's political willingness to recognize American independence and emphasized the importance of maintaining a firm negotiating position. His correspondence reflected ongoing diplomatic efforts by American commissioners in Europe and to secure formal recognition of the United States and favorable peace terms, which would later culminate in the Treaty of Paris. Lord North will resign, and this is the last event in this section. Lord North resigning as Prime Minister. Now we go into the third and final section of this chapter, which is called Novus Order Seclorum, from 1782 to 1784, and this means New Order of the World. So it's the New Worldly Order, and or the New World Order, and this will be in reference to the establishment of a republic and the recognition of American independence. So the first event that we have on this timeline is the Battle of Little Mountain, and it was fought near present-day Mount Sterling, Kentucky, as Captain James Eastill and roughly 25 militiamen clashed with Wyandotte War Party, and the Wyandottes won that skirmish. Rockingham becomes Prime Minister following the resignation of Lord North, and the Whigs take back Parliament, and they will be the ones who will negotiate peace with America. Washington sets up headquarters in Newburgh, New York. The British are still in New York City, and so Washington is keeping a close eye on British forces there. Thomas Paine writes an essay called The Necessity of Taxation, which is kind of an ironic essay, given how we just fought a war And one of the main reasons why the war was fought was taxation. Of course, it was about representation before taxation, not taxation itself. At least within the Declaration of Independence. And so the federal government now has to think about how it's going to govern the new states of the United States that are no longer colonies. And so informal peace negotiations begin in April of 1782. And this is when Richard Oswald, the British Peace Commissioner, arrives in Paris and meets Benjamin Franklin, the senior American representative in France. You have a naval battle in the Sands. British victory over the French in the Caribbean secures them productive sugar islands in the Lesser Antilles. So fighting is still going on, especially between England and the other European powers like Spain and France, even though fighting between British and American forces has pretty much ended. Hamilton will continue writing his Continentalist essays. The Netherlands will recognize American independence on April 19th, 1782. American and Spanish forces captured Nassau, Bahamas. Thomas Paine is continuing to write the American Crisis series. This is American Crisis number 11. And he will write the Supernumerary Crisis. There's going to be 2 of these essays. And here's an interesting European document written and published in Europe about the American War for Independence. It's a fictional letter, and it's reflections on the like the perspective of an American farmer, but in a way that Europeans can understand. So it helps shape early European perspective of the United States. Shelburne will become prime minister following the death of Rockingham, and he will continue the peace negotiations. Here's a Continentalist number 6 by Hamilton, which, again, the Continentalist essays are complaining about the Articles of Confederation. British troops will evacuate Savannah, Georgia on July 11th, 1782. Again, this is part of the British evacuating the South, and soon they will be evacuating the North as well. And this is the first formal meeting between Britain and America for peace. And the talks involved American commissioners like John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and John Jay negotiating with the representatives from Great Britain. In the Battle of Blue Licks, British and their native allies defeat Daniel Boone near Lexington, Kentucky. So there's still some skirmishes going on, especially in the frontier. Then you have the American Crisis number 12. Elias Boudinot becomes the 4th president of Congress, and he will oversee the Treaty of Paris of 1783. You have the preliminary Articles of Peace, November of 1782. The British will evacuate Charleston, South Carolina. King George III's proclamation declaring a cessation of arms. So now this is ending all fighting in preparation for the preliminary peace treaty, which is being ratified in early 1783. Also, early 1783, you have the Newburgh Conspiracy Letters, which is a series of communications known as the Newburgh Conspiracy Letters, circulated among officers of the Continental Army during the final months of the American Revolutionary War. These letters were part of a growing agitation within the officer corps at Newburgh, New York, where the army was encamped under the command of George Washington. Officers were frustrated by long delays in pay and uncertainty about pensions from the Congress of the Confederation, that's under the Articles of Confederation. The correspondence contributed to the tensions that culminated in the so-called Newburgh Crisis, which was diffused when Washington intervened personally to maintain civilian control of the military and prevent a potential mutiny, reinforcing the principle of Republican subordination of the Army to Congress. And so Washington will give this Newburgh Address, which will diffuse the Newburgh Crisis. Congress responds to the Newburgh Crisis with its own formal response. So it's Washington and Congress. William Cavendish will become Prime Minister, and he will foresee the Treaty of Paris. And Congress will make a proclamation, proclaims a cessation of arms and fighting. Congress will ratify the preliminary peace treaty in April of 1783. And then the Congress, this is Congress under the Articles of Confederation, will pass a resolution calling for a impost tax of 5% federal tariff proposal, and it failed to pass because bills in the federal government under the Articles of Confederation need to have unanimous support, which it doesn't. Nos ordo seclorum. The American Crisis, number 13. This is the final American Crisis by Thomas Paine, and this is him talking about the preliminary peace terms with Great Britain. And then you have the Cessation of Hostilities Proclamation by George Washington, and this will lead to the disbandment of the Army. And Washington will circulate a letter. It's an open letter, and in it he talks about a number of interesting things. One thing that he talks about is the necessity of the Union remaining together, remaining unified, and needing to strengthen the Union by revising or even replacing the Articles of Confederation. So that is an important, an interesting document from George Washington, where he's pretty much hinting at the future Continental Congress. You have the Pennsylvania Mutiny, where about 400 soldiers from the Continental Army, who was just disbanded, march on Philadelphia and surrounded Independence Hall, demanding payment for their service. And in response, instead of paying them, Congress just flees Philadelphia and goes to Princeton, New Jersey, where they will stay there for quite a while. And so in September of 1783, you have the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which formally ended the American Revolution, and Great Britain recognized America as an independent country. Thomas Mifflin becomes the 5th president of Congress, and he will hold the position for a little while. And then the British troops will evacuate New York City, and Washington will march in a parade, and this is known as Reclamation Day. And it used to have been a holiday in New York. It's not a holiday anymore since relationship with England has improved since 1783. And in December of 1784, Washington will bid farewell to his officers in New York City, and the building that they're in is Francese's Tavern, and I've been there many times. It's a really nice restaurant in Fidei, in the financial district of Manhattan, and it's really good food, and it's an amazing piece of history. Now you have the Supernumerary Crisis, number 2. This is the final of the American Crisis essays that Thomas Paine writes, and he's talking about the conclusion of the war and what the aftermath might be. as we transition into peace. Washington will resign his commission in late December of 1783, as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. And then the very last document that we have on the timeline is the proclamation from Congress ratifying the Treaty of Paris of 1783, which happens on January 14th, 1784. And so this is when the war officially ends, because the treaty has to be ratified. And so this is when the treaty was ratified. So that's why we have it going from this revolutionary chapter and the era ending in 1784 instead of simply 1783. So this will conclude the revolutionary era. It concludes this chapter on independence. And right before I end the live stream, I'm actually going to read the entire text of the Declaration of Independence. So on the timeline, you have these read document buttons. You click on that, and it will take you to the full text of the document. And so here is the reading of the Declaration of Independence. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions of the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose of obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civilian power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution, and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging a war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose own rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions of our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in Congress, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, and that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Whew, what a document. What a document. So thank you for listening to this live stream. We covered chapter 5 of our compendium. It is the second and final chapter of the Revolutionary Era, and I hope you join me tomorrow for chapter 6, which is the first chapter of the Founding Era, where we cover the creation of the Constitution. So, thank you for listening. If you want to check out our website, you can at www.tarpeia.us. Tarpeia is spelled Tarpeia.us, and this is the compendium. This specifically is chapter 5 of our compendium, and we are an educational nonprofit, a 501c3, so all donations are tax deductible. If you want to give a large contribution, you can email me at mark with a K at Tarpeia, Tarpeia.us, mark at Tarpeia.us, and I can provide you with more information about the charity, such as our EIN and address, if you're like donating through a donor advised fund or something like that. And so yeah, please contribute to the charity. We are making resources like this compendium. It is free for anyone to use. Anyone can access it. There's no advertisement on our site. There's no paywall. There's no special access needed to access these resources. And we have thousands of primary source documents organized in this interactive timeline that you can look through. And yeah, so thank you for watching this live stream. Please join me tomorrow for the next chapter, chapter 6, and I'll be talking about the creation of the Constitution. And so thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you tomorrow. So thank you, and have a nice day.